Chapter 19. I pulled the flying thunder, little clods of dirt falling over its sides, the spade rattling against the metal. Morning sounds played like music. Birds twittered, frogs croaked. A train whistled out in the distance. I walked with the early sun at my back, stepping carefully, watching for shingle nails. I knew what I was doing this time. Billy's house looked better in the softer light of morning until I got right up to it. I left the wagon off to the side and went around to the back door. I lifted my hand to knock, eager to tell Billy I'd brought him something. Maybe he would like it as much as I liked his airplane. Only then did it occur to me that it might not be Billy who answered the door. Did he have a nice mother? She hadn't returned our platter. It wasn't that we minded the platter. It was just that mothers were usually so careful about things like that. Billy had never said one word about his mother, much as I had hinted. I sure didn't want to see his father. I let my hand fall. The door stood open. The screen door hung by one hinge, making a gap, letting me see into the kitchen. There was no sound of people. I curved my hands around my eyes and leaned in for a better look. My first thought was that I didn't want the platter to come back from here. The kitchen looked like the junkyard. Dirty clothes and newspapers littered the floor. Dishes, chipped and unwashed, sat on the table with greasy machine parts and open cereal boxes. The sink had all but disappeared under dirty pots and empty cans. There was a pump over the sink where a faucet should have been. Looking for something? I whirled around, my elbow knocking the screen further askew. Yes, I said, my heart pounding. I'm looking for you, Billy. It came out high and pleading. You right out? Walked. I brought you something. Over here. I gestured toward the thunder. You giving me a wagon? No. I hadn't thought he'd think that. I stammered. I can't. It's Jeff's. I'm giving you what's in it. We were walking toward it. I was just teasing. What is it? I don't know what I expected, that his eyes would go soft or he would whistle or maybe say hot diggity like Andy always does. He said, What the Sam Hill am I going to do with that? Plant it. I waited, but he just looked at the tomato plant in the wagon. I saw it through his eyes. Dry, smelly leaves already wilting, roots straggling out of the clump of dirt I had dug up with it. It will make you feel closer to your grandma. Huh, he said, but it didn't have that hard bullet edge to it. We ain't even got a hose here, nothing to hook it up to. I hated the tears that were gathering in my eyes. You got a well, I said. Hey, yeah, I do, don't I? Something funny in his voice made me look up, even if he would see my tears. Clean white lines streaked down his dirty face. We both laughed and ran for the well. Billy filled a battered pail, then lifted a tin cup from where it hung by a wire on the pump handle. He let the cup run over with cool water, then held it out to me. Want a drink? After my long walk and with a lump in my throat, there was nothing I wanted more. I swallowed the water in long, noisy gulps, handed the cup back to Billy, and wiped my mouth with the back of my hand. We dug near a corner of the house where the plant would get the afternoon sun. Two tomatoes clung to the vine, one green, one red. Merry Christmas, I almost said, wondering why I thought of that in the middle of summer, wondering if Billy ever got anything for Christmas. He walked me back out to the road. The thin three-corner folded chronicle hit the front porch with a soft thud. The boy didn't look up to say hello, he just walked on, folding the next paper as he went. I picked it up, reading the Young Sprouts ad on the triangle with back page and undoing the folds. I always read it back to front. Three-line want ads and large store advertisements on the back page. Then in the middle, the local news, a picture or two, the garden column, and more big ads. I read every word, not that there were many. Closing it to read the front page last, I hesitated. This was strange. Heavy black lines outlined a square in the center of page 1. I bent to read the words there. With deepest regret, the editor and staff of the Chronicle must report news just in as we go to press. Lawrence Coffey, son of Mr. and Mrs. J. L. Coffey, has been killed in action. Koopa. There was more, but what was the use of reading it? I buried my face in the paper, clutching it in wads at my ears. When I couldn't breathe, I threw the paper down and just started running down the steps, past our garden, to the end of the block, to the softball lot, and on. Words echoed in my head. Need some help? Hey, Koopa, yeah. Enlist and you get what you want, he told us. That's not what he wanted. My feet said as they pounded the road. This wasn't what Koopa wanted. I slowed to a walk as I neared the Riggs's place. Billy hadn't been around since we'd planted the tomato. Did he hate it? Or was he just being here again, gone again, Billy again? I doubted if he ever knew Lawrence Coffey, but Billy was the only person I wanted to talk to. I turned in, picking my way through the weeds and trash up to his house. I leaned over the withering tomato plant and cried. I knew I should have, but I stamped around back, my face hot and wet. The screen door had come clear off and had fallen over the narrow steps leading up to it. I pushed it aside and pounded on the door. I tried the knob. I went around and tried the front door, twisting the knob, slapping the wood with one hand. The windows were closed, no curtains slipping out, flapping. I should have noticed first thing that the pail and cup were gone from the well. The handle worked hard, but I managed to pump some water into a rusty bucket I found at the edge of the junkyard. I hurried with the bucket, one hand stretched out for balance, everything blurred around me. It all goes to the roots, so don't overdo it, Billy had told me. I scooped the water out with my hands and dropped it around the plant, close in under the drooping leaves. One tomato ready to ripen clung to a sagging branch. A few drying blossoms fluttered in the breeze. Don't die, I whispered. I wrote to Jeff, but I didn't tell him any of the bad stuff. I told him Mr. Burt was almost well, that Dad would go to get him and Mrs. Burt when the time came, that we had saved our gas ration stamps for this, that the gardens were fine and the tomato duel was heating up. I finished with, Dad and I looked over both gardens together last night. We agreed our tomatoes are neck and neck. It will just depend on who happens to have the best ones come ripe on judging day. I began to think more about the duel than the war. Sometimes you need something to think about, Scott had said. But the talk around town was still of the war, still punctuated with, get it over soon. What soon meant, nobody knew. But things began to sound better. The latest news had captured everyone's attention. Operation Husky. The headline shouted, Allies win 10 cities. Yanks hurl back fierce attack. No landing force had ever been so large. Massive numbers of Allied ships, planes, and troops had advanced across the Mediterranean Sea's largest island, Sicily, just off the toe of Italy, the place I was going to go someday. When it was over, General Dwight D. Eisenhower said, by golly, we've done it again. There was more. B 24s had struck the German controlled oil facilities again at Plötzky. A triumphant headline announced, staggering attack on Nazi supply may turn course of war. Did soon at last mean soon? The walk to Billy's house seemed shorter now that I was used to it. Old Wolf pranced out ahead, barking at cars, raising puffs of dust with his paws. He was strong again, but he still whined for Billy when I took him out on the leash. We walked out every other day, and I checked the single tomato plant. The shack hunkered further down into the weeds. No cup at the well, no footprint in the dust, no flapping curtain at the window hinted of people. I dribbled some water over the plant, wishing it had all turned out better. Billy wasn't the judge's son, or Mr. Walker, or even Koopa. Billy was my friend, my age, my loss. In all of his disappearing days, I had never suspected that he wouldn't show up again eventually. He was carrying on somewhere, I supposed. Scott was carrying on too. So were his mom and my parents. I guess it's time to grow up, Wolfie, I said. Who knew that could be so hard? The day came for the young Sprouts to make our final war stamp purchases. We met at the Chronicle and paid for the next ad. The rest of the money from the garden would be ours for rides and eats at the Harvest Festival. We went to Guarantee Bank and bought our stamps. The teller grinned as she counted them. You kids really did it, she said. Carefully pocketing our stamps, we tore off to the sweet shop. Charlie Sweet leaned over our table. You guys have been my best customers this summer, he said. We had, almost every week, we'd had a nickel each to spare for ice cream. I may go broke after school starts. How'd that garden go anyway? Lot of work? You bet your boots, said Andy, and that got us started. We talked about the weeds and the worms, sunburn and mosquito bites, and sweaty treks around town. The good stuff, too. The carrots we rinsed off with the hose and ate in the garden, the ice cream we made when we weeded Scott's garden, the ball games, and all the money for stamps. You mean you didn't spend it all here? Charlie teased. We had gathered an audience as more customers drifted in. A burly looking man swiveled around on his stool at the counter. Anybody here seen that Riggs kid lately? That stopped our chatter. I think they moved, I said. Why? The man turned back without answering. He drummed his dirty fingers on the counter. Who is he? I whispered to Scott. Junker Jenkins, the junk man. Haven't you ever seen him? Not up close. The man said to Charlie Sweet, You see him, you let me know. He's got something coming to him. I want to make sure he gets it. About time he got what was coming to him. Andy hadn't quite come around, even after the soaker hose. Scott and I exchanged looks. Oh, Billy, what have you done?